Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. It's Paulie Esther here, and today we're going to talk about the newest issue of Game Informer magazine. That is GameStop's in-house magazine about gaming. And Mathieu Cote, our game director on Dead by Daylight and head of partnerships at Behavior Digital, he tweeted that he took part of an interview in the magazine here. It says, "I had the joy of spending the day taking a stroll down memory lane with Devious QC," that's Dave Richard, and the creative director of Dead by Daylight, and chat with our friends at Supermassive Games. And that cover is just gorgeous. It really is here. Game Informer cover reveal, the casting of Frank Stone. Dead by Daylight's first single-player title was born from a collaboration with Supermassive Games, and we visited Behavior Interactive in Montreal to play an early slice of it and learn exclusive details. And I had somebody send me their copy, so we're going to go ahead and read through it right now. Okay, here's the cover of Game Informer magazine this month. It's about a 12-page read. We're going to go ahead and get into it here. From the universe of Dead by Daylight, the casting of Frank Stone. A killer collaboration, how the masterminds of Dead by Daylight and Until Dawn united to unleash the gruesome terror of the casting of Frank Stone by Marcus Stewart. So Dead by Daylight does have this collaboration with Supermassive Games, and they're releasing this game called The Casting of Frank Stone, which is canon lore with Dead by Daylight, and there are going to be some crossover cosmetics if you own both games on your system, but I'll leave that video for another day because this Casting of Frank Stone isn't coming out till early September, so we have some time to talk about that, and I'll show you exactly what you get if you do decide to buy the Casting of Frank Stone and what it'll unlock for you in Dead by Daylight. We'll leave that for another day. We're just going to read the article here today. All right, here we go. Dead by Daylight is a bloody success because it wholly fulfills the grisly fantasy of every slasher flick ever made. Whether hunting victims as one of its many powerful killers or fleeing for your life as a hapless survivor, the asymmetrical multiplayer game has delighted fans throughout its 8-year history, which you can read on page 42. In that time, a fan base sprouted around the game's lore. The premise of a powerful malevolence called the Entity trapping ordinary people in an endless cycle of hide-and-seek matches with killing machines hailing from multiple universes and media franchises brims with intrigue. For years, fans have salivated over the idea of a single-player experience that fully taps into this well of background storytelling. Developer Behavior Interactive took these pleas to heart, but it didn't just want to put out just any single-player game. This experience had to do the brand, the fans, and the genre justice, even if that meant looking beyond its walls for help. Enter Supermassive Games, another studio that has achieved its greatest success through the horror genre thanks to its titles like Until Dawn, the Dark Pictures Anthology, and The Quarry. Leveraging Supermassive's expertise in cinematic, story-driven horror games, the teams crafted an original story set within the Dead by Daylight universe, The Casting of Frank Stone. We visited Behavior Studio in Montreal to speak to designers from both studios and play the game's prologue to learn how this marriage of contrasting design philosophies is shaping up. Joining forces, Behavior knew for a long time it wanted to create an experience that expanded the lore of Dead by Daylight beyond in-game flavor text and, most importantly, the confines of an asymmetrical experience. As popular as the game is, Behavior says a sizable section of its fan base doesn't even play it but enjoys the universe vicariously through their favorite streamers and content creators. Aww. Multiplayer games aren't for everyone, and Dead by Daylight's intensity and social cooperation are barriers for more laid-back or single-player-minded fans who enjoy the franchise's premise and vibe. Behavior recognized this as an opportunity to create another doorway into this world. Speaking to proper leads at both studios, Behavior creative director Dave Richard and head of partnerships Mathieu Cote, along with Supermassive creative director Steve Goss and ex-producer Traci Tufte, I can't read that. Behavior first contacted Supermassive in 2020. As Goss humorously recollects, the team didn't reply, at least not initially, but after eventually reconnecting, Cote describes the initial talks as easy due to how quickly both teams understood each other as game designers and as mutual horror fans. It also helped that Supermassive has several passionate DVD players within its ranks. In our first meetings, it was clear that Supermassive already understood what is important in the universe, what the rules are of our universe are, and how to interpret it in the best way to be able to represent it a good story, says Richard. So very early for us, it was obvious that it was going to be okay. This comfortability was a deal maker. As Cote later adds, Behavior spent years lovingly crafting Dead by Daylight's characters and lore, and is understandably protective of it as a result. Sure, it had already once given the keys to the franchise to PsyOp, developer of the 2019 comedic KFC dating simulator, I Love You, Colonel Sanders, to create the similarly zany Hooked on You, a Dead by Daylight dating simulator in 2022. That project helped Behavior open up to the idea of letting other creators reshape its biggest franchise. But Hooked on You also had the safety net of being a silly and, more importantly, non-canon experience. Non-canon? I got cosmetics from it in DVD. What you mean non-canon? It could get away with anything. The collaboration with Supermassive was intended to be a serious, canonical story, which raised the stakes for success. Despite positive first meetings, Goss points out the timing wasn't ideal to immediately begin a project. We had a lot going on at the time, he says, likely referencing the then ongoing releases of the Dark Pictures anthology, which were launching at a yearly cadence between 2019 and 2021. The two parties agreed to revisit the conversation once Supermassive adjusted and cleared its schedule a bit. Behavior was more than happy to wait. We could have gone with others, says Cote. There are other developers out there that are not bad at this kind of thing. But for us, the whole Dark Pictures anthology, I mean, Until Dawn is a staple of this type of game. Like, everybody knows about that game. And for us that play a lot of horror games, of course, we were familiar. So we're like, we really hope that we can have something like that for Dead by Daylight. It was just a matter of being patient. After about a year of waiting, Supermassive told Behavior it was ready to go. Supermassive approached adapting the game's lore the way it leveraged real-world legends and myths for the Dark Pictures anthology. Take the core tenets and create something new with them. And Dead by Daylight's strange lore, read more about that in the sidebar, offered an alluring storytelling potential. There was a wonderful little moment in our discussion where, I forget who said it, someone said, in this universe, this is a story, and in this universe, that story is a reality, says Goss, and that was the moment of clarity around how we would do this. As Richard notes, DBD has its own set of in-universe rules and parameters that Supermassive had to keep in mind. At the same time, Behavior states that DBD's world is also very malleable and capable of producing many different stories. The franchise has shaped itself to fit IPs as disparate from each other as Saw is to Dungeons & Dragons. Richard also recognized Supermassive as a master at its craft and wanted to ensure the teams had the tools and freedom to add its unique flavor. While Goss echoes the desire to stay true to what makes DVD click, he also stresses the importance of telling a story that appeals to players unfamiliar with the game. Supermassive has its own dedicated fan base that will flock to all its horror games, including the casting of Frank Stone. That means, although it's set within the DVD universe, it must also stand alone as a good horror story. I think the most important thing was coming up with a great story, a great experience for our players, says Supermassive's Traci Tufte. I think that says Tufte. Sorry. It's a little tiny for me when I'm reading this. And then being comfortable leaning into what is familiar, leaning into what people love about Dead by Daylight, while also balancing that with the kind of gameplay and cinematic experience that Supermassive Games generally offer. That means creating relatable, likable characters and a compelling and terrifying antagonist who feels at home within DBD's deep roster of killers. For this reason, Behavior and Supermassive decided to create a new threat in the murderer, Frank Stone. Goss explains that building a story around an existing killer like the Trapper would be challenging. Fans love the killers, so there's the pressure of doing them justice. But Goss says fans have already crafted their own fiction around these monsters and have an ownership the developers wanted to respect. You don't want to kind of just cross that, says Goss. A new nightmare. From a storytelling standpoint, Cote notes that another aspect of cementing behavior's trust in Supermassive was discovering their shared horror movie inspirations. We were sort of shooting back and forth some references like movies and books and things, and no matter how sort of deep or obscure the reference is, most of the time it would be like, oh yeah, I know what you mean, like this part of that thing, right? Oh yes, and this movie and this thing. And it made for a very fun conversation. First of all, but also it built trust really quickly because we're like, okay, we understand all the references that you're talking about, all the kinds of stories we want to tell, the sort of contrast that we like. So it's a good place to start. The casting of Frank Stone's inspirations ranges from the works of Stephen King to Steven Spielberg, particularly The Goonies, co-written by Spielberg, and more crucially, J.J. Abrams' 2011 sci-fi coming-of-age film Super 8, which Spielberg produced, came up several times in our talks. Super 8 may be the biggest touchstone, as, like that film, the casting of Frank Stone centers on a group of bored youths making a movie. Let's see. The game's storytelling unfolds during the summer of 1980 and centers on a group of teenagers. Christine, Chris Gordon, Jaime Rivera, Linda Castle, Robert Green, and Bonnie Rivera living in the quaint town of Cedar Hills, Oregon. This town would be completely unremarkable were it not for the previous atrocities committed by its resident serial killer, Frank Stone. The teens, who Goss describes as late high school age, decide to work together on a filmmaking project and leave their mark on the horror genre. There's no better way to do that than to film a movie at the condemned Cedar Steel Mill. The site of their flick is Murder Mill due to the location's mysterious association with Frank Stone's crimes. As you'd expect, what starts as a fun film project goes awry. Alright, and there's a little sidebar here. Dead by Daylight's lore explained. Onlookers from the outside may only know Dead by Daylight for its infamous killers and myriad cameos like Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, and the Xenomorph. Some are likely unaware of the narrative glue binding it all. Dead by Daylight is governed by a powerful and sinister force called the Entity, described in-game as evil in its purest form. This malevolent being invades worlds throughout the cosmos, plucking victims to trap in its realm. Sometimes these chosen are already evil. Others may be corrupted into committing horrific acts before they were taken. This is how its killers are born. The entity's control over killers varies by individual, but their purpose is to hunt and slaughter survivors. These ordinary people stumbled onto corrupted areas and were pulled into the entity, trapped for eternity with no memory of how they arrived. The entity feeds on powerful emotions, whether that be the killer's rage and bloodlust, or the survivor's fear, desperation, or hope. Thus, it pits both parties against each other in never-ending trials where survivors must try to escape an arena before the killer snuffs them all out. Regardless of the result, the entity gets what it wants. Other elements are at play, but this is the gist. Since the entity can traverse various timelines across the cosmos, it explains the mishmash of various media properties. Leatherface, for example, is real in his world, but fictional to the survivors. Since Dead by Daylight takes place inside the entity, the casting of Frank Stone represents an opportunity for players to see, for the first time, how the entity forces its way into the world from the outside. Okay. Behavior in Supermassive are hesitant about sharing plot or character details. We don't know the main cast's personalities, but Goss describes the narrative not as a coming-of-age story, but rather a decisive moment-of-age story. The teens are on the cusp of adulthood, enjoying what could be their last summer together, their final days of freedom before moving away to college or getting jobs. Making a film serves as a big activity they can all share. From a gameplay perspective, the casting of Frank Stone is a choice-driven cinematic experience in the mold of Supermassive's previous horror titles. Any character can be killed based on your decisions, whether dialogue choices or surprise QuickTime events. However, while a character's demise is usually permanent in a traditional Supermassive title, the concept of death isn't as straightforward in DBD lore. When a survivor dies, the entity revives them, wipes their memory, and places them right back at the starting campfire to begin another trial. While that narrative conceit justifies numerous DBD matches, the studios tease that this concept will be explored and played with in the casting of Frank Stone. As such, the narrative can take many different directions, but Goss stresses that the breadth of outcomes is closer to Until Dawn's rather than the Quarry's staggering 186 endings. Like past Supermassive games, the casting of Frank Stone includes the Pass the Controller couch co-op mode, where you can make decisions and scream your head off alongside friends. However, this familiar formula features several new twists inspired by the filmmaking premise and, of course, DBD. The teen's Super 8 camera is at the center, which will serve as a central gameplay mechanic. Again, Supermassive is cagey about providing too many details, but Goss reveals that players can freely take out the camera and film everything, which unfolds in first-person view. It's a fully functioning camera. You can reload it, for example, and its capabilities evolve throughout the adventure. Goss even teases that it may not be the only camera players use. The camera is necessary for story and gameplay sequences and serves as the core intersection between the teens. Although the camera brings them together, it also becomes a point of tension. If you've ever been engaged in a kind of group creative exercise, people do try and vie for the leadership of the group, teases Goss. When asked if the teens have special perks or talents, like DBD survivors, Goss is initially hesitant to respond before stating, none of them are superheroes. They're absolutely normal kids who go through the most appalling experience and come out on the other side. Some of them, Mathieu Cote coyly adds. This is the extent of the main storyline details Supermassive and Behavior are willing to share. However, I did sit down and play the casting of Frank Stone's prologue, which takes place in 1963 and lays the foundation for the events to come. A missing person. After a cinematic intro scene, I play police officer Sam Green, who visits the still operational Cedar Steel Mill in search of a missing child. A lead has brought him to this location, and I begin my search by questioning the mill's security guard. I guess there's going to be a little bit of spoilers here for the prologue, if that's something that's important to you. I begin my search by questioning the mill's security guard, Tom. He's a friendly but drunkard old-timer who watches the mill with his dog and partner Doberman named Merlin. I probe Tom about the kid's whereabouts, and the lines of questioning can steer the conversation in several intriguing directions I won't spoil. Sam's treatment of Tom and whether players acknowledge key environmental clues can open additional dialogue options and determine Tom's attitude and willingness to cooperate. I freely explore the steel mill, which shifts from open spaces to more of a labyrinth network of corridors that players can poke around, find hidden clues, and helpful inventory tools. DBD-inspired flourishes are abundant, big and small. A DBD jingle plays when a new objective appears. Different types of collectibles draw direct inspiration from the game. Supermassive is keeping this secret for now, as does a revamped UI. At one point, I move aside a pallet blocking a door, a clear nod to how dropping pallets hinders a killer's pursuit in DBD. Most notably, some of Supermassive's traditional QuickTime event button prompts have been replaced by DBD's skill checks. For the unfamiliar, performing a specific action in DBD requires stopping a moving needle within a designated zone on a circular meter. That minigame is accurately replicated in the casting of Frank Stone, adding even more tension and nuance to performing split-second saves beyond just hitting X. Nailing the needle in the optimal zone results in the best possible outcome, relatively speaking. However, failing the minigame can lead to negative results, like a character sustaining an injury, which can affect future interactions. Supermassive used DBD's signature elements to create fun overlaps between the two gameplay styles and to introduce ideas and mechanics the studio's cinematic games have never explored. For example, the casting of Frank Stone features non-scripted AI character behaviors, contrasting the usual heavily scripted behaviors of Supermassive works, but bringing the game more in line with DBD's more systemic nature. Goss also teases more freedom in exploration and interactions. One of the first kind of creative conversations we had was, "It isn't a Supermassive game, nor is it Dead by Daylight," Goss explains. "It's a thing of itself, and it has to bring all those threads together. For us, it's actually quite a freedom to take the rules that we had and generally tear them up and throw them away and go, okay, what can we do here? How can we make that different?" There are things which maybe appear to be quite traditional in a Supermassive way, but again, I would like to put that out there. They aren't quite as straightforward. They have a different depth, and they have a different style and theme, which will make them feel different and make them feel authentically Dead by Daylight. We've thrown a bit of the rule book in places. We've thrown away a bit of the rule book in places. The casting of Frank Stone is fully developed in Unreal Engine 5 and looks great. Facial animation has subtle details like spit flying from mouths, and facial expressions have genuine emotions behind them. The exceptional lighting, thanks to its beautiful shadows, accentuates the great character models while contributing to the foreboding presentation. While I wasn't particularly scared by anything in the initial segment, nor did I encounter any of the more substantial gameplay differences, Goss referenced that... Nor did I encounter any of the more substantial gameplay differences Goss referenced that make this feel distinct from Supermassive's previous horror titles. It's an effective tone setter. For DBD fans, it's also the first offering of the many exciting references to that universe. Given the various direction that the narrative can take, Supermassive has made it easier to replay segments to see alternate outcomes. A new feature called the Cutting Room Floor opens after you've beaten the game, but will be available at the start for Deluxe Edition players. It displays the web of possible outcomes, locked and unlocked, of every narrative fork in each chapter and the number of collectibles you found or can be found. Every decision has a percentage number representing the number of players who chose it, and this statistic will continually fluctuate as more people play. You can replay any segment, preserving your choices from the previous section of the game and only changing later outcomes and vice versa. Since some outcomes can only be experienced by making a specific combination of decisions, this seems like a great, streamlined way to witness the different story permutations and go collectible or achievement hunting without replaying unnecessary stretches of the whole game. So that's kind of cool that you can figure out where the fork is and go back to that point of the game instead of playing the whole game over and say go back here and then make a different decision and see where that takes you. Pretty interesting. What scares the devs? The casting of Frank Stone is made by horror fans for horror fans. This begs two questions. Which scary movies do the leads at Behavior and Supermassive love the most? What horror trope or element frightens them more than anything. Mathieu Cote. Favorite film is Cabin in the Woods. I think it's... Oh, and what scares him the most? I think it's usually terrible people. The supernatural stuff I can deal with, but the terrible people who are just evil. Not because they're possessed, not because of aliens, just because they're horrible people. It just gets to me. Traci Tufte. Oh yeah, okay, so that's bigger. I can read that now. From Supermassive. Favorite film is 1996 Scream. What scares Traci the most? When people are trapped, like buried alive, trapped in a box, and no one's coming. Oof. Dave Richard from Behavior. Favorite film? Can't decide, but shouts out A24's horror films like Hereditary from 2018. What scares him the most? Real loss of sanity. Again, not like possession, but there's some sickness, brain sickness, insanity that can affect anyone, and when they represent that well in a film, I think that's truly scary because it can happen. It's really close to us. It can happen to anyone. And Steve Goss from Supermassive Game, favorite film, loves everything from the 1930s Universal monster films to 1980s slasher flicks to modern films. He found Hereditary deeply, deeply disturbing. What scares him the most? To be honest with you, every Stephen King book ever written in hardback, I sometimes had to put those down because his characters are so convincing, and I feel so stressed for the characters he's created and the situations they're in. It's like, nope, I just need to go and have a cup of tea. All right. I think we're more than halfway here. A mutual learning experience. The casting of Frank Stone allows DBD diehards and curious newcomers to explore the beloved universe at their own pace. Instead of worrying about teaming up with questionably friendly strangers online and pulling your weight, you can soak in the closest thing to a DVD movie. We've listened to our community, and they wanted a new experience in the Dead by Daylight world, Dave Richards says. A single-player experience is what they're after, and I'm really excited to see how they find it. As someone who's a bigger fan of Supermassive than DBD, I'm most curious to see how the game fulfills the studio's promises for more unique and surprising experience. Until Dawn, the Dark Pictures Anthology, and The Quarry are enjoyable, but adhere to a similar playbook. Goss consistently teases that the casting of Frank Stone's story structure is probably not what you expect it to be due to the chaotic nature of the DBD universe. Major studios rarely collaborate on a game in this manner, and the development has seemingly been a positive learning experience for both sides. It was really cool to see how Supermassive builds their games, Richard says, especially because our game universes are so different in terms of control and how we build up our horror. Horror is horror, and we're all building the same kind of experience for our players, what the type of feeling they're going to get. But it's really the level of control is so different. In DBD, it's just humans doing whatever they feel like. It's chaos, there's no control, and building that cinematic experience was fascinating. New audiences are interesting, Goss adds. New voices in the game we make, new fans, what they take from it, and then doing that in a universe that's already a video game. It's kind of like a meta thing. You know what I mean? It's like a movie license. Oh, they're two different mediums. You can't do that in a film. You can't do that in a game. That's the tension you have. But here it's like, but you can do that in the game. Dead by Daylight does that. Oh, you're right. Okay. We just need to turn that over and upside down. And I'm trying to figure that out. So that kind of growing experience, we've taken a lot from it. Behavior, having been a work-for-hire studio for much of its 31-year history, got to be on the other side of such a relationship for once, which they say has been a lesson in itself. We tried to be the client that we've always wanted to have, says Cote. It's cool. It remains to be seen how the casting of Frank Stone will ultimately turn out, but if all goes well, DBD and Supermassive fans alike will have a common cause for celebration when the game releases on September 3rd. All right. Now, there's a little bit of DBD here. I think there's like 4 more pages of this. Generating the Hook, How the Developers of Dead by Daylight Sunk Their Teeth into Millions by Alex Van Aken. We looked at it and we're like, oh shit, that's going to be bad. What is that? What is that? Some bug? I'm kidding, mostly. Okay, here we go. Behavior Interactive's Mathieu Cote says, recalling his fear of being slower to market in the fledgling asymmetrical multiplayer genre. I remember while we were making the original prototype, Turtle Rock Studios started saying they were going to release Evolve. Apart from scattered modes in series like Left 4 Dead or Splinter Cell, few multiplayer games provided the asymmetrical cat and mouse experience the developer Behavior Interactive aimed to deliver. Cote and his co-workers loved horror, and they believed they could explore the niche differently than the market's current offerings. They had an idea for an original IP wherein players assume the role of a horror movie villain on the loose. This nascent concept eventually became what we know today as Dead by Daylight, a horror gaming staple that has attracted over 60 million global players since its launch in 2016. Among the group was Dave Richard, a game artist who would become Dead by Daylight's senior creative director. I started my career here as a pixel artist working on Game Boy Advance titles. That was pretty fun. As a company, we've been work for hire for so long, so I had the opportunities to work with a lot of licenses like Scooby-Doo, Monster House. I'm naming the more horrific ones, Dave Richard jokes. In Scooby-Doo, we managed to do little rooms that were quite mysterious and spooky for kids. I love that feeling in non-horror games. You get into these rooms and it's raining and there's a mood and it's mysterious. I've always loved horror, so that was cool, he continues. And at some point, I transitioned to game design because that's what I always wanted to do. The first game I designed was Monster House, a really fun Zelda-like game on Game Boy Advance. Dave cut his teeth working on various contract projects during his early years, eventually meeting a few cohorts, including Cote, who eventually became Dead by Daylight's head of partnerships. The crew began pitching original games more often, subsequently developing Naughty Bear, Panic in Paradise, a downloadable follow-up to the 2010 Naughty Bear, a dark comedy action game that Dave Richard also helped to design. Our job was to make the games that were being given to us, but we had our own ideas, Mathieu Cote tells me. And the joy of work for hire is that once in a while you have downtime, at least for a little bit, and that's how new projects happen. Dead by Daylight matches up a team of 4 players playing human survivors against another person controlling an overpowered villain, aka the Killer. The group must attempt to escape the killer's clutches by opening the arena's exit doors that imprison them. To successfully escape, the survivors must activate a series of generators while narrowly avoiding a gruesome end. If the killer lands enough strikes on a survivor, they can hang their prey on a hook, killing any player not rescued in time. This terrifying concept has captured the minds of millions, making it one of today's top-played multiplayer games. However, with few resources and no publisher secured, the Dead by Daylight team endured humble beginnings. A killer idea. According to Cote and Richard, the prototype featured a one-on-one format in which the survivor had 4 lives and could regain them if they successfully returned to their dead body. Crucially, the team lacked a developer with network knowledge, so they installed a piece of cardboard on their monitors prevent screen peeking. The original prototype was created in Unity super fast by one person who was not a programmer, Cote tells me. It put it together with hope and bubblegum. According to Cote, this person still works at Behavior, but prefers to remain anonymous. Actually, it was pretty similar gameplay-wise. The basic loop was there, Richard adds. Dead by Daylight's flagship villain, the Trapper, was merely a large blob in the demo, while the Survivor was Unity's generic starter character asset wearing different t-shirts. The generators, which are crucial in every match, were primitive 3D cubes with a simple minigame. There was a pig, Richard laughs, just a pig running around, not to be confused with the pig, the nickname of one of the playable killers. This ordinary pig served as a gameplay mechanic to confuse the killer into thinking a survivor was close by. This team still talks about adding it to this day. Interesting. Around this time, the Dead by Daylight developers finally played Evolve, the 2015 multiplayer title, competing for space in the asymmetrical niche. The team discovered valuable lessons while playing Evolve, but to their surprise, these learnings highlighted several pitfalls they wanted to avoid. They released Evolve and we played it, and we were like, there are a few great examples of how not to do things in here, Cote recalls. The game sort of switched in the middle, right? You were the prey, and then you became the predator. The 4 survivors had fixed roles. You needed one of each, and we thought, okay, we don't want to do that. They reversed the fantasy, Richard chimes in. These were all things that we steered away from. The team quickly decided to improve the project and bring it into Unreal Engine. So, the fixed roles, right? That's talking about, like, anybody can use anybody's perks. You don't have to play a certain character to be the medic or a certain character to be the speedy one. Anybody can do that, and I think that's one of the strengths that Dead by Daylight has still to this day. All right. The team quickly decided to improve the project and bring it into Unreal Engine, involving folks like Fadi Baroudi and Mark Sala, Dead by Daylight's technical director and original art director, respectively. A visual style began to take shape as the artist aimed to create organic and distorted buildings with impossibly long planks of wood forming the landmarks. A tile system, still used to this day, allowed for elements of randomization, building placements, generator locations, and exit areas to complement the map's larger static points of interest. The team implemented network play as behavior began staffing the project, suddenly playing full screen at their desks. The player count increased from 1 versus 1 to 4 versus 1, with the additional users controlling their own survivors. And notably, the studio already experimented with this format while developing Naughty Bear years prior. Very few people know this, Richard teases. There's a multiplayer mode in the first Naughty Bear where you can play 4 versus 1. One player is Naughty Bear and 4 others are just normal bears. It's called Jelly Wars, and your objective is to get jellies and put them in a mixing machine, and Naughty Bear is just trying to kill everybody. It's always been something that was a powerful fantasy for us and that we wanted to work with. The road to launch. Most people we showed it to were excited and thought we had something, but very few publishers wanted to get involved, Cote says. And most of them told us not to do horror. Nobody buys horror unless you're Silent Hill or Resident Evil. Don't even try, it's not worth it. Very few people believed in it until we met Starbreeze. In 2014, Behavior Interactive entered into a publishing agreement with Starbreeze Entertainment, a company that helped bring the Payday series and Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons to market. Starbreeze was the only publisher who offered to get in business with us and allow us to keep the IP. To us, that was critical, Cote says. While Behavior purchased the publishing rights years later, Starbreeze's marketing support was crucial to Dead by Daylight's initial success. A few months before launch, Starbreeze advised engaging players at events like PAX and E3 and collaborating with streamers, which were pivotal for early success. You need to have a PAX booth and show people your game. You need to do these things and go on Twitch to interact with content creators, find a couple of stupid friends with a YouTube channel, and give them the game so they can make a video. Wait, what? Don't tell them how to make the video, just let them do it, Cote says, imitating the advice Starbreeze gave them. We gave a very rough beta build to 3 or 4 YouTubers. They had followings. They made a video and showed it to us before they released it, and we were like, they're not scared. They're just having fun and laughing with their friends. This makes our game not serious, right? No, it's right. They're having a good time. According to the pair, PAX attendees were forming lines around the booth by the end of the convention. The title wasn't even out, yet streamers were already requesting features. At this moment, the staff knew they had something good on their hands. Despite the positive reception, tensions had grown between Starbreeze and Behavior over the project's core framework and how players would queue into matchmaking as killer or survivor. In the first iteration, a play button was in the middle of the screen, and we had nonstop arguments with Starbreeze about it, Cote recalls. They said, "Put a play button there. We'll route players into the side that needs people right now." But Behavior was adamant that players should play whichever role they desired, so much so that it considered having separate executable files for killer and survivor to load into whichever side of Dead by Daylight they wanted to enjoy. Starbreeze was worried there wouldn't be enough survivors to balance matchmaking, but the development team argued that people love to be frightened and it wouldn't be a problem. Ultimately, the bet paid off, and Behavior sold over 1 million copies in its first 2 months, surpassing the projected 400,000 lifetime sales from the external firm it hired. The plan was we launch, we make our money back, and then we all go back to making the next game that Behavior works on, Cote says. We immediately realized that was not going to happen. We were between Overwatch and Counter-Strike Global Offensive on Twitch, and people were saying Overwatch is better, and we're like, yeah, it is. 500 people worked 3 years on it. It's been 3 of us for about 18 months. Players saw it on the same level, which was amazing, but the bar was high. We had to step up, fix bugs, and add features. We were patching almost every other day. Then we started creating new content and DLC, and we never relented on that. It was a breakneck pace from the get-go. It was exhausting. Welcome to Hollywood. The team released its first update 2 months after launch, introducing a teleporting villain called the Nurse. However, the passionate crew had much higher aspirations for Dead by Daylight's second chapter in October. They wanted Halloween. Behavior had been making games for about 30 years, so we have contacts in the movie business. A lot of licensors knew our name already, which opened a couple of doors, Cote says. We were lucky enough to get in touch with the right person, Rand Marlis, who runs the catalog that owns the rights to Michael Myers. He's old school Hollywood, but understood what we were trying to do. It was a harder sell, and I had to push, but we explained we were building a love letter to the work, and having Michael Myers in the game was a great way to legitimize what we were doing. The character would live on in a new form and reach a new audience. Cote's pitch resonated, and nearly 3 months after launch, Behavior released its first premium DLC for the title, featuring Michael Myers, Laurie Strode, and a map set in Haddonfield, the New Jersey township where the movie takes place. The event was a huge success, emboldening the team to continue pitching to licensors. The team scaled from roughly 30 employees at launch to over 100 within Dead by Daylight's first year. This was a special moment in the licensing world because we signed Nightmare on Elm Street, Saw, and Leatherface almost simultaneously, Richard adds. We had a lot on our plate at the same time, and although we proved ourselves with Myers, we were trying to make something special. The hustle never stops. In the following years, Dead by Daylight has enjoyed continued success, largely thanks to its staunch fan base, encouraged by the game's ever-growing roster of original characters and licensed persona from pop culture horror entertainment. Behavior has continued collaborating with massive horror brands, including Stranger Things, The Ring, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Castlevania, the latter releasing later this summer. According to Steam Database, a popular gaming analytics tool, Dead by Daylight attracted 84,000 peak concurrent Steam players this past June, over 8 years after launch. This number doesn't account for other platforms, including console users. Considering this exhausting content calendar, I asked Cote and Richard if the team's work-life balance has improved, and if so, what measures are in play. Regarding that Steam peak, when 2v8 hit, that went to like 99,000. which is the highest it's been since Nemesis came out in 2021. So we surpassed this year's peak and the peak from a couple of years. We don't have an overtime culture or anything, Richard says. We're working hard, we're passionate, pushing as much as we can, but then we go home. Overtime for us is a failure of management, Cote firmly states. I've always been extremely adamant about that. We launched in 2016 with a team of 30 people, and I have to say, as the project producer, maybe 10 people worked overtime to launch it, and they all took time off after we launched. I thought he was going to say, I have to say, we've done a pretty good job so far. Really did. Anyway, I asked Richard if he's worried the well of content is at risk of drying up. After all, how many characters can they feasibly design before running out of new ideas? The energetic director pushes back at the question, confidently stating that horror entertainment is in a golden age and creators are releasing inspiring art, ripe for crossovers all the time. 8 years into the journey, the two developers champion Dead by Daylight as a recurring destination for all horror fans, as if it's an anthology of the genre's best offerings. They certainly make a compelling case. Reality check. While I sense a genuine concern for employees from the head of partnerships, Mathieu Cote, and creative director Dave Richard, Behavior Interactive Leadership, has laid off up to 140 employees since January. In a June press release, the company cited pursuing a clarified vision as a core reason for its most recent downsizing. In the same statement, the company noted its work-for-hire business and Dead by Daylight as the two foundations that have grown the company from 575 to 1,300 employees over the last 5 years. Over the same period, the greater gaming industry has also witnessed remarkable growth, the release states. I've asked Behavior Interactive representatives about these inconsistencies, which aspects of the business declined, and how it's handled retained staff, and if it's made substantial efforts to fill the 47 job vacancies posted on its external career page at the time of my visit. While we understand an official statement is likely to come, Game Informer did not receive it before this issue's printing deadline. We will publish relevant updates online at GameInformer.com. Yeah, I mean, that's sad to see. A lot of good people that I know that I broke bread with who lost their jobs in that downsizing. I'm sad to see them go. I'm happy to see some of them land on their feet and get new positions. And I'm also at the same time selfishly upset that they aren't going to be working with me or with Dead by Daylight anymore. But the entire industry has taken a downturn. That's the reality of it. And Behavior has not been exempt from that. And I thought they would be, because they bought studios around the world. And I thought that they were about as bulletproof as anybody in the industry could be. But turned out that wasn't the case. So the reality of the whole industry swelling and COVID, and then retracting as the world returned to normal. And there hasn't really been any company that's been exempt from that, sadly. All right, so we'll finish this off with the back cover, which has Frank Stone holding the mask here, which this is going to be one of the things that you can get for Trapper if you own both games. So there's your front cover. There's your back cover. And all right, that's going to do it. That's a pretty long video reading all that. Thanks if you made it this far. That's all I have to share with you today. Thank you so very much for watching. As always, I appreciate the time you spend with me here on my channel. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, as it helps the channel a ton. Don't forget to take care of each other in and out of the fog. And we'll see you next time. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye. It's a Gen Rush life for us. It's a Gen Rush life for us. Set a hiding, we do gens. Set a randoms, we got friends. It's a Gen Rush life.